everyone. My name is Brianna Contreras, and I'm Associate Editor of Managed Healthcare Executive.
And my name is Peter Werwein, and I am Senior Editor of Managed Healthcare Executive.
Today we have Perry Cohen joining us today for our latest episode of Meet the Board series on the Tuning Into the C-Suite podcast. Perry is not only a member of Managed Healthcare Executive's Editorial Advisory Board, he is CEO of the Pharmacy Group, which provides services to associates, healthcare and information technology organizations, payers, and pharmaceutical companies. So thank you for joining us today, Perry.
My pleasure.
All right.
Are you confident that this information-driven system, this technology, which, relates to the technology first, businesses that you just referenced, Bright Health, etc. Is this information, is this data actually being used in ways that help patients?
Yes. First of all, the systems generate a lot of data. So now you have a business of taking the data and turning it into information. And from information, you create knowledge and affect change. Well, there's about 3,000 companies out there that are classified as technology-enabled service companies in healthcare. And there's a lot of people who know a lot more about technology than me and in great systems and data capture, and they get everything kind of worked out, and they have to impact the patient, and it falls short because they don't have a healthcare professional between the technology and the patient. So the phrase now is high tech, high touch. And high touch organizations are becoming more technology driven, and technology companies are adding more healthcare professionals to lead them and add that soft component. Even someone like Jeff Bezos, who launched Amazon Pharmacy, they send personal notes signed by the pharmacist to the patient as the final touch, because healthcare is about touching somebody. I went in for a procedure last week, and they had a nurse assigned to me for the whole time I was there for my procedure. And I think that model is what they're forcing to do now, because they've got to keep the consumer experience really nice. And they've elevated the patient to a consumer because they have so many choices. And healthcare professionals need to have that service mindset.
You don't feel that some of this touch is purely performative, that it's just to make us feel better and something else is being lost?
No, it's, for example, let's talk about lab. There's two components to lab work. One is the drawing of the blood, and then number two is what happens to the blood once it leaves. Well, the drawing of the blood, we'll all agree, you want it to be a pleasant experience. You want somebody who's an experienced phlebotomist taking the blood, taking it away. After the tubes are taken out of you, do you really care where it goes, to some digital lab or someplace else? Not really. So there's a lot of technology and what we do to the blood, but it's still the drawing of blood hasn't changed in a long time. Maybe they made the tubes a little nicer, type of thing. So there's still that touch component of healthcare that really impact people's decisions on who they go to. How was I treated? My privacy, right? And so that's the part that I think regular business people underestimate when they go in the healthcare space.
Yeah, I guess it speaks to sort of the quality of the experience, which is maybe part of the triple aim. I don't know, but
yeah, well, healthcare is quality, access, and cost, and we all define quality differently based upon our backgrounds and experience. Access is basically, limited for certain people for economic reasons or geographic reasons. And then cost is the one thing we can measure. You paid $8 for something, I paid $4. So I spent less money, it was a better deal. And drugs are really more of a product than a service. But if we both go to a different family practitioner, and I love my guy, and he charges me a lot of money, more than your doc charges you, I said, I'm okay with paying that because he does a good job for me. And that's the challenge that's been around for as long as I've been in the business when you do on the delivery of healthcare side. But between financing and technology, it's just really getting crazy and frustrating for people. But you got to realize we're moving from individual patient management to population health management, and that's going to benefit everybody long term. And when things are digital, we can move things around. And as not my generation, but Brianna, your generation becomes more mobile. I mean, your generation uses time and space differently than I do. And as long as I have my smartphone, right, I can be anywhere and get anything. I can see a doc now. I can get an X-ray, all that kind of stuff. That's a good thing.
Right.
But the rest of us have to kind of adapt to that model for certain types of patients.
But one of our main topics for this conversation was to talk about, a recent opinion piece that you provided to us, which will be featured in our February issue, but it covers the COVID-19 response between Sweden, Japan, US, for example. So this data of responses was collected from a recent webinar. I believe that the Pharmacy Group hosted, correct?
Right. One of my international company hosted it. Yeah. One of my
okay.
Yeah.
So, a lot of that data was collected under responses under the Trump administration. So now that, we're under a Biden administration now, I mean, if you can just share maybe some of your thoughts on, how this COVID approach will change under his lead, whether that be mask mandates, COVID testing, vaccine.
Yeah, well, what we learned when we had the seminar on December 2nd is we had a physician from Sweden, a physician from Japan, and a moderator, a business person from the United States talk about, their experience in 2020, how their respective countries had handled the crisis, good, bad, and indifferent. And they told us pretty candidly what they had done. And then we talked about where things going, and they each had a different perspective based upon the culture in that country and the government and how they treat it. And in the United States, we're the only country that doesn't have a social mandate for universal coverage. And the government then operates off of that fragmented piece that we have. All the other countries, Japan, Sweden included, they have a social mandate for universal coverage. So government has a directive, if you will, to take care of everybody collectively. So, I think the president, Mr. Trump, was acting off of the mandate that we have in the United States, let us do our own thing. And so we would have fought any kind of coordinated, controlled piece. And so he just went with that. And I think a chunk of the population was happy with that. A chunk of people weren't. But when you're dealing with a public health issue above everybody else, you got to get everybody on the same page. And you got to know what the truth is. And the unfortunate thing is there's three ways we get information right now. We either get it from the media, whether it's Fox News or NBC or LA Times. We get it from the politicians, what's their version of the truth. So you have the media's version of the truth, the politicians' version of the truth, and you have the third bucket, which is the truth, which you find out from people on the ground, people in the ERs, people actually doing things, mostly physicians. So that's what we put on our program. We got 2 physicians from the ground in Sweden and Japan to tell us what's really going on. And we had 100 people dial in, and they really liked getting a kind of a real perspective. And I think, I noticed yesterday, for example, Biden said, I'm going to let Fauci do the talking for me, and I'm going to go back and be president. If Mr. Trump would have done that, it would have saved him some, awkward moments, I'll say. Because when you're talking about public health, I think you're talking about physicians, and we're in their wheelhouse. And let's do what they say. And hopefully you have the right physicians at CDC and FDA and NIH making policy decisions that we all live by. And I think you're going to see some of that now. So I think, you'll see a little better cooperation now. And the question is, will we all get on the same page with that and say this is what's best for the country?
Okay, thank you. Now, you mentioned universal coverage kind of plays into my next question on Sweden's approach. So their approach was, again, I believe more hands-off, where they, they didn't have any lockdowns. Face masks weren't, required. Schools were open. So a lot of this had to be, I think it was their goal was to kind of not overwhelm the healthcare system and kind of have maybe a little more controlled approach. But a lot of that makes sense now as to where you mentioned a more universal coverage. So they probably could afford to do that in a sense. But to my question, I guess, what were your thoughts on just how they handled that? And then is there something you think the US should adopt or in that sense?
Well, at the end of the day, it's what's socially acceptable by the majority of the people in the country.
Right.
Okay. And in Sweden, they did whatever the government said, and they bought into that. Canada's the same way. I could rattle off several countries, but whatever the government says, we trust them. We do what they say. The United States, not so much. You know, the government's like one piece of information. And to some people, they'll do whatever the opposite is of what our government says, whether it's federal, state at the governor level, or local. And the other dynamic is healthcare is a local market issue. You know, we're a big country geographically, over 300 million people, a lot of things going on. So if we can have a general policy and then each state kind of looks at the data, to your comment earlier, Peter, what is the data saying what we're doing? And I just think that we were dysfunctional last year in letting the normal system manage things, report things. And that disruption gave us a worse outcome. I think in Sweden, they were more coordinated in whatever they did. Open up, close down. It was a more coordinated approach. And so they were able to, I think, do a better job than we did.
I do think that the Biden administration explicitly is moving towards a more centralized approach.
Right.
They're talking about, for instance, just one example is federally supported vaccination sites. The promise is 100 of them.
Bring in FEMA, you know, to run all that type of stuff. But
as opposed to letting it devolve to the states.
Just let's go. Let's go.
And I think also Biden is, you know, sort of temperamentally and also just his general outlook inclined to depend on expert advice more than Trump, who.
Well, you know, people have opinions on science, you know, academic side, whatever. But science, to me, science always wins.
So thanks, Perry. Maybe we'll pick this up some other time in the not too distant future. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, guys.